So what are the key business drivers impacting supply chains today, Hans?
The key business drivers which we see, which have the biggest impact in terms of changing the way how we think about supply chain processes, about manufacturing, engineering processes, there are three. The first one is about customer centricity. And customer centricity is not new. We are talking about demand-driven supply chains since 10 years and more. We need to understand that it's not only demand-driven. We need to understand that it transitions into market-driven. We need to understand that we need to introduce the speed in the supply chain. We need to understand that it's all about omni-channels. So companies are introducing multiple channels, how they sell products. All of this requires, for supply chain professionals, to be very close to the sales teams, very close to the market teams, and in order to understand the demand much better. So first is the customer centricity, through changing the way how supply chains run. Second element is about the personalized solutions or individualization of products. In this individualization of products, what's behind there is that companies are super innovative around the world, introducing products which are individualized for a customer, for an end consumer. So these kind of concepts you see in all industries, from fashion industry, where we know it already since quite some time, from food production, from the element of discrete manufacturing like car manufacturers, like in the industry, machinery and components industry. All industries are introducing this concept of individualizing the product. This means we need to have a complete new understanding of product development, the cycle of connecting not only product development with manufacturing, but sales with product development and with manufacturing right away, so that you can leverage this kind of environment in a different way. So the second element, personalized solutions. The third one is truly about end-to-end visibility, but it's not only visibility, it's also sustainability. It's about compliance, ensuring that you really support the compliance from the very beginning, the source of the product, to the very end when you sell the product to the end consumer. Three business realities companies are facing: customer centricity, individualization of products, and the end-to-end visibility.
Sure. So a supply chain network today has several partners. You've got customers, suppliers, OEMs. So how can collaboration at each of these levels and at each of these roles help in managing supply chain better?
Yeah. So collaboration is the key ingredient in supply chain. Since ever we are talking about how can we establish collaboration between companies. And it was always very, very difficult. We know as a fact that only about 15% of the suppliers are connected with their customers for direct material collaboration. So not a very big or good penetration in the market. We need to change that. We need to build networks. Business networks become the driving force in extended supply chain, in supply chain processes. What is a network? A network means that partners are onboarded to a network, and with this kind of network environment, you can collaborate, you can communicate in a much easier way. You take away the burden of building one-to-one connection. You actually build an environment which allows to connect much easier in terms of having these partners already on a network. An example is the Ariba Business Network, where for indirect material collaboration there are 1.8 million trading partners on this network. You don't need to go out there anymore and build a one-to-one connection. You can look into the network. Who are your partners? I need to communicate. I need to create a purchase order. I want to have the invoicing process, the scheduling agreement process. I want to have the payment process, all actually supported in such a network. This is what we need to understand also in the extended supply chain, for direct material, for logistics collaboration, for the outsourced manufacturing processes, for the asset management processes.
Sure. So it is very important for a business leader today to effectively and efficiently meet demands. How can he have demand-driven processes?
Demand-driven is a way of thinking which has been introduced, like I said, 10, 15 years ago, I would say. The idea of I design a product, I produce a product, I distribute, and then I sell the product is gone. You only can sell actually and be successful if you understand the market and if you understand the demand. So the demand is actually triggering the processes to replenish, to produce, and so on. So demand-driven as a concept has been introduced in supply chains since quite some time. I think actually there will be a next level of this demand-driven aspect. Partly it is dependent on the introduction of multiple channels, how products are being sold. Another aspect to it is truly the Internet of Things idea. Just think about the aspect if you have vending machines where you actually select products and you need to replenish to a vending machine. You have signals from this vending machine and not from an order from a retailer. Just think about examples where 3D printing maybe is taking part in a restaurant or maybe even in a private household. So now you need to replenish actually to these individual machines. The whole aspect of understanding these signals, not only point of sale signals from a traditional retail scenarios, but signals from machines, signals from 3D printers, signals from vending machines. This is the future where it's not only demand driven, it's actually market driven and it's actually sensor driven. So Internet of Things in this context, you will see more and more as a very important aspect as well.
Right, as you just said, 3D printing is the future, but we've been talking about it since a long time. So when do you think it will go mainstream? What are the challenges?
Yeah, very, very good, very good. It's absolutely true. We were watching 3D printing since quite some time, right? So it's not a complete new technology. I think actually there are some elements which have been introduced in the last couple of years which are triggering a change, which really introduce the aspect that it can become much more mainstream. Think about different industries and just think about different examples. In aerospace and defense, when companies building airplanes are thinking about 3D printing, they are not thinking about the service parts aspect. Actually, they're thinking about using 3D printing in order to create components which reduce the weight of the plane. Yeah, instead of having several components which you need to put together, where you have an increased weight, now you actually print a component which reduces the weight, which is so important for airplanes, which is so important for the entire concept in aerospace and defense. Think about the element of mining. For them, it's about service parts, right? So if you have the possibility to have an environment where you can print a component, the service parts, at the time when you need it. You don't need to store it somewhere in the world and fly it around and it's super expensive and things are breaking down. You actually get a very flexible environment in order to produce it and print this environment. Of course, technology actually has evolved a lot in 3D printers. I've seen an example just recently where it is possible to print a component within 7 minutes instead of a couple of hours, right? So the technology in this area is supporting that a lot. We see that the adoption of 3D printers is not just in the manufacturing environment, but now service providers, freight forwarders are introducing this as an additional service to their customers, right? So a complete new way of what kind of services service providers can offer to their customers. They take on manufacturing now, right? So with 3D printing, it changes the way how we need to think about the supply chain again, how we think about manufacturing again. So we see the adoption more and more, faster and faster, and broader in all the different industries and in all the different concepts of manufacturing, service parts, supply chain, how we sell products, and so on.
Sure. So Hans, for a supply chain head, an ideal situation would be to have zero inventory. Is it possible? If yes, how?
Yeah, I mean, if you ask me, right, so right now, if somebody tells me, well, the ideal situation is zero inventory, I would say no, right? So as a supply chain professional, I'm working in this environment since almost 20 years, right? So I would say we need to have an optimized level of inventory in order to support the demand situation the best possible way, in order to be flexible, in order to really run supply chains nowadays. In the future, we can think of getting really into an environment where we completely digitalize inventory. Right? It's not so futuristic anymore, and it goes hand in hand with what we just discussed on 3D printing, right? So if you don't need to hold the inventory, the product itself in a warehouse anymore, but when there is the demand, you print the component. This means that you reduced and digitalized the inventory situation and that you reduce it to zero. Will it be in the near term? No. Will it be in the midterm? No. In the future? Yeah, I think so. There will be actually a time when we completely digitalize this inventory situation, where it will be fast and very nimble and flexible and individualized. But right now, if you ask me for the next 5-10 years, The ideal situation is really to have an optimum level of inventory, which allows you to introduce the flexibility, being nimble, having the distribution networks in place which support the processes the best possible way, which allow you as a company to be successful, increase revenue, increase profitability, and for an end consumer, getting the products more or less when I want it, immediately.
So when we talk about supply chains, China is at the forefront. It has beautifully integrated its logistics with the world. How do you see India vis-a-vis China when it comes to supply chain management? And when can India reach that level?
It's also a very interesting aspect, actually, the different regions in the world, right? And I travel around the world all the time, and I see the impact in terms of logistics, in terms of supply chain, from Europe to North America, to Latin America, to China, to India, to all the countries around the world, Africa, right? So, and we see the infrastructure, we see what is important in the future. One major element in the future has to do with urbanization. We know as a fact more and more people will live in cities. Cities are growing and getting bigger. One aspect which is being discussed by governments around the world is the issue of bigger harbors, actually, in ports in these cities. The issue of getting bigger and bigger ships, right? This causes, actually, when such a big ship arrives in such a harbor, it causes a traffic jam. You have growing density of population, so we need to introduce ways how we overcome that. There are ways how to do that. There are connected logistics processes. There are very nimble and flexible processes which have been introduced in order to do that. Back to your question, right? So comparison of China and India. In my view, yes, China, very true, has done a phenomenal job in order to really introduce logistics processes and connect their economy with the world, especially with the US. There's a lot of trade going on between these countries. India, I think, actually has a true chance from a strategic location, but also what I see what India does in the sense of ports. The introduction of highly efficient and big ports, the big ships actually all stopping here, becoming a center of the logistics environment, and at the same time of manufacturing. Think about the Make in India initiative. I think it's very exciting, and it really provides the future. Think about the connections on the railway, right? The railway actually to China, the railway to Kazakhstan, the railway to Europe, right? So where India is really in the forefront of really establishing this kind of networks. So I think India is very well positioned in the future to really be a very, very strategic area, and just from the sheer population as a market, I see India not only as a market where you ship to the other markets, but actually you get a lot of trade into India, right? It becomes a very interesting market for all companies to sell products into India. So I think very well positioned. The proximity to Africa, to the Asian world, and in the middle here allows India to be very successful in the future. I'm pretty optimistic about that.
So what does it mean to have a sustainable supply chain? And what impact can a CIO have on a supply chain to make it more sustainable?
Sustainable supply chain is a very, very broad term, and I think we need to break it down in several aspects. There's one aspect which is about compliance, product compliance. One of the big headaches many managers and companies have: how can I ensure that my product is compliant? How do I know that my suppliers were compliant? How do I know that my suppliers were compliant with their product which they sold to their supplier, which they sold to me? How can I ensure that to my end customer, that everything actually is in order and is really supporting? And the answer is really about the introduction of, again, using networks, using the compliance elements with it, where you connect the suppliers, where you connect them right away, not only for the exchange of purchase orders, but you ask for the certificate, you ask actually for, please certify that the product is compliant. What are the quality data? How can you prove it? With that, actually, you get a network, you get an end-to-end visibility. We also want to leverage Internet of Things in this context, right? Products can talk in the future, machines can talk in the future. Why not leveraging this information in this environment and build this end-to-end visibility? We know, the dream of farm to fork, end-to-end visibility. All what I eat, I know exactly actually where it went and when where it was and what kind of ingredients are in there, the environment during the transportation. So this is one major aspect which we get under control. I'm very optimistic about that and really drive that forward with the concept of Internet of Things. The second element in sustainability is really also about the risk management. It's about the resource management. There's a discussion about water, about land, about raw materials, minerals in the future. Right? So all these aspects will change the way how supply chains work and how supply chains run. But believe me, when you talk to supply chain officers, chief supply chain officers, COOs in this world, the number one risk they see is actually skilled people. Right? It's not number of people. We know that there are a number of people, but the skilled people in supply chain is the number one risk, the number one issue they see in this changing world where it's not about warehouse processes which are simple. It's about understanding the complex environment of a supply chain and running such a supply chain. So we need to work with universities around the world in order to educate people, to really get people excited about running logistics, running this environment in the future. So sustainability has several facets and aspects. It's really about the aspect of compliance, right? Understanding that and having that into an end-to-end environment, but then also consider resources like water, land, minerals, and people, right? And having that in a risk management environment as well.
Right. Can you give us some use cases wherein SAP has transformed its clients or enterprises' supply chain?
There are many use cases where companies are super innovative and are driving the way going forward. I could now give you the example of out of the top 25 supply chains of this world, which have been published by Gartner every year. I think roughly about 20 are using SAP solutions and SAP systems in order to do that. So it's a highly successful, I think, environment for us, and it's also a proof point that we are understanding the market, that we are in the discussions with the customers, that we understand also in which direction which we go in order to provide the right solutions. However, it would be arrogant for me to say that our solutions are transforming the supply chains for the customers. It's the customers who are innovative, the companies who are innovative and really changing the way how they run their business. What we can do is understand what companies are doing, understanding also the way in which the whole industry is thinking, and also drive it as a thought leader, drive it forward ourselves, but then providing solutions to support companies. This is what we need to do. Yeah?
But you give a very interesting example of Harley-Davidson, how it turned around after going through a lean patch 5 years ago by leveraging SAP solution. It would be great if you can talk a little bit
Oh,
more
absolutely.
on that.
Harley-Davidson is a wonderful example. There are many different examples, but Harley-Davidson is a wonderful example where a company which was in trouble really introduced a complete new environment, having an environment where the order fulfillment time from order taking to fulfillment was about 21 days, changed that and reduced it to 6-7 hours. And at the same time introduced the concept of product individualization, of using variant configurations, so where I can configure the product when I order the motorbike at Harley-Davidson, having an environment in mind where the proximity of suppliers to the manufacturing plant is a key element in order to introduce the speed in the supply chain, in order to introduce the speed in manufacturing, and leveraging Internet of Things in the manufacturing process to optimize, to introduce the productivity, connect everything there, and have an individualization of manufacturing processes itself. So Harley-Davidson did a wonderful job actually in introducing all of that in their environment. We see this kind of innovative environments in many different industries with many of our customers, and I would even say we're working with the leading edge customers in the different industries.
So we are seeing the usage of disruptive futuristic technologies in supply chain. For instance, RFID, use of drones for deliveries. What next? What do you see?
That's also a funny example, right? Using drones. And just this week I also spent some time in other parts of Asia. I was in Australia, I was in Thailand, and I had some very interesting discussions also about this topic. And it was kind of a round table, and we were discussing, what about drones? Where does this go to? Is this an aspect which we need to consider in terms of efficiency in the delivery in supply chains? And there was a very interesting thought from one of the panelists, and he introduced this idea of, well, he doesn't believe that this will be actually introduced in a very urban area, so around cities. But the examples which he gave, for example, in Australia, where you need to deliver products to a farm which is hundreds of miles out there, and there's only one farm out there, wouldn't it be efficient to have actually such a drone concept which allows you to support such a delivery of these farms, right? And I think actually that's very true, and you can see that around the world. You have the same in the US, you have the same in other regions of this world, where you have the countryside, the issue of how do I support in an efficient way the delivery of products to a less and less dense area. And then in the cities you have the higher density, right? So where you need to introduce ideas of how to actually introduce smaller vans, how to support a distribution in a different way also in the city, where it's much more about the granularity of where to position inventory, how to have a network there. But then at the same time, you don't want to forget the countryside, and here drones can play a role, right? I think it's not established, but it can play a role.
Okay, but you don't see drones playing a role in urban areas. You feel
I
they are
think
more
actually,
relevant in
the
rural
issue
areas.
is, and there were discussions in the US just recently, and if I remember everything correctly, but the elements where you have the airports, right, and now you have the conflict of drones and planes. So it is a security element of how you would support that. Think about if in such a high density area like the Bay Area in California, where you have 3 airports around the Bay Area, and now think about you have all the drones flying at the same time. It becomes very dangerous, I think, and the safety issues will play a huge role. And I even think it's not necessary. I think there are different ways how to do transportation in such high population area versus the countryside. That's my view. Maybe I will be corrected over time, who knows.
Anything else that you'd like to add? Any message from your side to supply chain heads in India?
I think it's a very exciting and interesting time we are living in. It's not only that the supply chain processes are changing, where it becomes not only demand driven, but same day delivery. We need to understand the market. We have these elements of the efficiency in the logistics, the connection with the suppliers. So the supply chain is changing, but also at the same time the product changes. I think one element which needs to be considered and needs to come much closer is really connecting this product network with the demand network much better. Why is that? When you design a product, you decide already about 80% of the cost of this product, right? So 80% of the cost is determined at the point in time when you design the product. Your supply chain is already determined, right? Because the engineers have already selected their suppliers, have already made the decision, this is your network. So the costs are there, and now you need to optimize this environment. So what if we combine and bring these people closer together, talk early, design the network also based on optimized ideas and optimized decisions in order to really support a very efficient supply chain in the future. So I think introducing more the collaborative thought, reduce more the silo thinking, and understand supply chain as a strategic weapon for your company is the advice I would give.